Hello everyone, welcome to the Fix It Frank 412 YouTube channel. Today we'll be doing the rear brakes and rotors, pads and rotors, on my dad's 2019 Ford F-150 Raptor. We're gonna have to get started. I already went ahead and jacked up the rear end and put jack stands under it. I have the front end jacked up, as well as we'll be doing a tire rotation at the same time here as the brakes. So first we're gonna have to get into the cab of the vehicle. We need to put the rear emergency brakes, since it has the electronic parking brake. We need to put that into a maintenance mode. Okay, we're now in the truck. To put the electronic parking brake in the maintenance mode, this vehicle does have a key. If yours has the auto stop start button, you'll do the same process, but just with the clicks on the auto start stop button. I will put in the key and turn the ignition on without starting the vehicle. I will push in and hold the parking brake as if I was releasing the parking brake, while also pressing and holding the gas pedal. Set you guys down here for a second. Press and hold the gas pedal all the way to the floor. And I'm going to push and hold in the parking brake. I'm going to cycle the key off, back on. And you will see, you'll hear a noise outside. Continue holding both. You'll see the brake button flash. It'll say parking brake not released. And then you'll see it says parking brake maintenance mode. At this point, shut your vehicle off and we're ready to go ahead and start replacing the brakes. Okay, again, we have the rear end on jack stands. I did jack the rear end up via the pumpkin. One thing that this has become somewhat controversial, but one thing to be careful of when you're jacking the rear end is I always try to jack forward of where you have your differential cover. The reason people say don't jack on the rear end is because if you bend this differential cover along the bottom, you could compromise the seal and cause a leak. So always jack forward of that. If you're jacking on the rear end, not on the cover, you'll be fine. So I went ahead and did that. We have it up on jack stands. And I have a 21 millimeter to remove the lug nuts. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. Okay, now that we've removed the wheels, I wanted to just quick show you the parts that I went with. I went factory Ford, as I do with most of my vehicles and projects. So pads were Motorcraft BRF 1959. Those are the pads, and the rotors are BRRF 418, and the other part number is listed there below. Same with on here, there's a second part number as well. So I'm going to open these up and just match everything up real quick before I get started. I always do that. I like to make sure that I got the right parts before I start tearing everything apart. So I want to make sure the pads look correct, see if they came with hardware, which I think they did, and then check the rotor, make sure it's the right size. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, as I mentioned, I wanted to just kind of make sure everything looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a brake pad here and hold it up, and yes, that looks good. That lines up correct. They did give us new hardware, which is nice. And then rotor, same thing. Usually with the rotor, I just kind of slip it on. Slip it on kind of backwards, just to make sure the size lines up. Make sure everything looks good, and that does look correct. I ordered these parts from Tasca Ford. They're one of my favorite to order from. I've ordered from them before, and they match everything up by VIN number, so hopefully the parts won't be wrong. So now the parts look good, I'm going to set that aside for now. We're going to go ahead and figure out what size we need for our bolts here to take the caliper off. Nice thing is we do not need to take the whole bracket off. This caliper bracket, the caliper will come off here and the pads will come out. The bracket is not in the way of the rotor, so we will not need to take that off. So let me see what size wrenches we need. We'll be right back. Okay, this is a 13 millimeter on the back, and the one thing that we may need to do if this starts spinning is put a, if you have a wrench the size that fits in here, it is kind of narrow, or we may need to put a pair of vice grips to hold this side so it doesn't spin. So we'll go ahead and get these two bolts out, top and bottom. And just be careful once we take this off. We want to make sure we don't pinch any of the wires for the electronic emergency brake. So we'll get these loose, get the caliper off, and I'll be right back. Okay, I went ahead, the caliper came off, and I just set it up here. There's really no good place to hang it on the Raptor. I guess we could have hung it from one of the bed rails, but I'm just going to stick it here. That means there's no, it's not holding, it's not pinching any of the brake hose or these wires for your electronic emergency brake. We'll come back to that shortly. We need to reset the piston in there. But then you can see should be able to come in here, use a screwdriver or something to get the old pads out. You can see these pads had a little bit of life left on them. We have about the truck just turned 50,000 miles. We have a little bit of life left on them, but they're getting, they just barely passed PA state inspection. So wanted to get them replaced before the weather went too south. Once we pull those out of there, these clips can come off. Again, they gave us new ones in the packet. Do make sure you take note of kind of how these go on orientation wise. So the longer side of the clip that sticks down is on this back side away from the hub. So we'll go ahead and get that off and go ahead and, a little tough to do this with one hand, but we got it. Okay, we'll get those both off. And once we get the rotor off, I do want to take a either wire brush or something and just clean this rust off of here, because if there's any buildup on here and you put the new clips on top and they don't sit as tight as they should, it's going to cause your pads to not move as easily, and you'll end up with premature wear on one or both of the pads, and your brakes won't function quite as you'd hope. Now we should be ready to get this rotor off. I've seen some videos where the rotor's already kind of loose. This one has a little bit of movement, but is kind of stuck on there, probably due to the salt we get here in Pennsylvania. So should be able to just give a couple light blows. And that will make the rotor come loose. Sorry for the noise. I should have prepared you guys ahead of time. So now the rotor, you can see, is loose. We'll go ahead and remove this rotor. It's not in terrible shape, but we've learned here in Pittsburgh, most of the time, these rotors aren't made as good as they used to be. It's just better to replace the rotors and the pads at the same time. That way you don't have any pulsations. You don't need to worry about cutting the rotors. And it's just all new parts in the rear. You won't have to worry about it for a while. So, gonna go ahead and take this off of here. Okay. And you can see it's nice. With the electronic emergency brake, we don't have any brake shoes to worry about back here, so the rotor just comes off. Now I'm gonna go ahead and wire brush these, get our new clips put on. I am gonna stick a little bit of anti-seize on the hub here. That will be helpful when we do this again in 50,000 miles. Should help the rotor to come off even a little bit easier than it did this time. We'll also want to, when we're getting the pads ready, we'll want to match up and make sure that they match up with these old pads if there's any differences from the inside to the outside, which I don't think there is. That one's the inside and this one's the outside. They look the same, but I'm going to just double check that as I'm getting the new pads out and make sure that there's no differences, and we'll get the two pads ready for this side. We'll be right back to put this back together. Okay, we want to go ahead and wire brush these up. As you can see, got the heavy rust off. They're just rust colored at this point, but you know, they're smooth. Nothing should be obstructing us there. Went ahead and put my anti-seize on here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the new clips placed on here. Again, remembering the orientation that they were last time. So we're gonna go ahead and push that on. You might need to use something, you know, I'm gonna use the kind of wooden handle of my brush here just to Make sure they're down all the way. And we're going to do the same with the top. If they're very hard to push on, chances are you have not removed enough of the rust scale buildup. I mean, I'm basically getting them on all the way by hand, just using my brush handle to be sure. And they'll fit pretty snug. There's clips here on the side that will, you know, fit on both sides, so they're not gonna move around at all. So we went ahead and did that. I watched another video where the guy said to not grease these if they're still moving. They are moving still really well, but I am gonna pop these off and just throw a little bit of, I have this Sil Glide brake lubricant, that, you know, I'm just gonna stick a little extra on here, because even though they're sliding good now, doesn't mean that in 20-30,000 miles they may not start binding up. So I'm just gonna pop these out. To pop these out, you simply just need to kind of hold the boot. I'll try to do this with one hand. Kind of hold the boot as you pull out the slide, and get the boot out from around the pin. Might need a little small screwdriver. Trying to do this with one hand so I can show you, but just be careful if you're using a screwdriver not to ruin the boot. But once we get the boot out from one side, should be able to kind of slide it out from the rest of the way around. Okay, and just, I do these one at a time, so you remember, sometimes these are different top to bottom, so I'm just gonna do them one at a time to make sure that I remember where they go. So let's go ahead and slide that out again. You can see there's a lot still on here. I'm gonna go ahead and stick a little more on here, and then you'll just slide it back in and push it on until the boot slides itself back on. Okay, went ahead and put those back in. We're gonna go ahead and slide the rotor on here, and I'm gonna use a hold the rotor flush, which will help us when we're installing our brake pads. Put a lug nut on down here. That will help hold the rotor back in place while we're putting. There we go. That'll help hold it in place while we're sliding our pads in, as we'll want to install the pads. We have to install the pads before we can bring the caliper back over. We're ready now to reset the caliper. Just spin this over here. Again, making sure not to kink any of the lines. This is a hard line, so just want to make sure we're not putting any pressure on it, but I want to make sure we're not hurting that at all. And I'm going to stick an old pad in here. You do not need to turn this, even though it looks like you might need to turn this to reset it. You'll want to just push it in. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick an old pad against it as to not hurt it. And we're going to use the brake reset tool. We're going to use this tool to push it back in. It should push in easily. If it does not, that means that you are not in maintenance mode correctly. Okay, we got that caliper reset. So now we're ready to put the pads in. I'm going to use this Ceram Lube that I purchased off of Amazon. I like how this works. To put some lubrication on the ends here where these slide in the clips here. And then I like to put a little bit where the outside of the caliper touches, as well as the inside of the caliper on the inside pad. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. I'll show you once I'm done, and as I'm doing that, then we'll slide these into here and get ready to put the caliper back on. Okay, we've gone ahead and got the new pads in. Now, one thing I did notice from the old pads to the new pads, I noticed that this changed a little bit. This has some holes in it, I'm gonna say, and this one did not. But one thing I did notice is the old pads had this kind of extra piece over top, whereas these did not, because there's nothing clipping over here or over here. And since these are Ford pads, I am going to transfer this. I'm assuming it's just an extra kind of sound deadener piece, but I'm going to transfer this from the old pads on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of slide that on there. Again, I think it's just a kind of sound deadener or a sound vibration piece, but that was a difference from the factory pads I was taking off. So you know, up to you if you want to transfer that or not. It's possible you might get a little brake noise if you don't. So this, I can actually see where the caliper touches on both sides since I took that off. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw a little bit of that lubricant on here as well. Again, just some additional protection so we don't get any brake noise. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll then take this caliper, bring it back. You'll see that it definitely needs to be retracted all the way to fit around these new pads. And I may also have to push in these slides to make sure I get the caliper on. I did notice this kit, one thing as well, it included this hardware. It also included new caliper bolts. I can see there's some sort of like thread locker on there. So I read somewhere about torquing those to about 27. I've never torqued bolts for brakes, and I've never had an issue. I know there'll be somebody in the comment section that will say that I'm doing it wrong, but I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never had a problem. So I'm gonna go ahead and just tighten these down like I would anything else. Put the vice grips on here to hold it, tighten this down until it feels tight. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll be right back to wrap up. We're all put back together here. We got these tight, got the new bolts in there, calipers tight, took my lug nut off, so we're all good to go here. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side off camera. Same procedure as this side, just opposite side. And then we're going to go ahead and I'll show you how to, when you're finished, go ahead and I'll show you how to re-engage the emergency brake out of maintenance mode. Okay, got the other side finished. We're going to go ahead. I haven't let the rear end down yet. Once I do, wheels are going to get torqued at 150 foot-pounds. So I'm going to do that here momentarily. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead here, pop the door, and I'm going to press the brake pedal a couple of times just to... we may have to take it out of maintenance mode, so let's just do that now. Want to make sure that I check the brake fluid before we're all done here. So to take it out of maintenance mode, we're gonna do the same thing as before. Put the key in, turn it to the on position. Instead of pushing in on the parking brake, we're gonna pull out, press down on the gas pedal, and then cycle the key. Set it down here again. Sorry about that. Okay, so pull out on the emergency brake, push down on the gas pedal, key off, key on, and then you'll see here in your display, and you'll hear a noise outside. It's now taking it out of maintenance mode. The brake light you can see is out over on the left, and we no longer have a warning message here on the dash. So we're now out of maintenance mode. I'm going to go ahead and shut this off. Again, I'm going to pump the brake a couple of times. It is very stiff. I'm going to go ahead and, even though we're still on the jack stands, I'm going to go ahead and start the vehicle. Press the brake a couple of times. Maybe even cycle the emergency brake on and off. And we'll go ahead and check the brake fluid. Let's go ahead and check that. And sorry to get you guys up close there. Gotta remember where the release is here. And we'll check the brake fluid. And here is our max line here. Fluid looks like it's about here. So we are good. We are between the min and the max. So probably would be at the max if I had done the front brakes as well. Not doing those currently. So we are good. And that wraps our video today. So again, I just got to let the vehicle off the jack stands. I'm going to torque those back wheels at 150. I already torqued the front ones when I rotated the tires. And we'll be good. So thanks again, everybody, for visiting the Fix It Frank 412 YouTube channel today. I will may have some other videos on this at some point in the future, probably front brakes here, maybe in 6 months or so. And then there's other videos on my channel. So if I've helped you at all, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you very much, and see you in the next one.